A single dad who found a lost wallet, never expected. The woman who owned it was a lonely billionaire who had spent years searching for the family she never knew before. We dive in, hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment. Where in the cruise world are you watching? From the afternoon light was the color of weak tea, thin and watery, as it filtered through the dusty windows of the Oak Creek Public Library. Liam Hale stood behind the circulation desk, the scent of old paper and lemon polish clinging to the air like a second skin. His fingers traced the worn spine of a book, returning to its shelf. A familiar rhythm in a life that had become a quiet loop of repetition and responsibility. He glanced at the clock. 4:15. Maya would be out of school in 10 minutes. Her small hand would find his, and her chatter about art projects and playground politics would fill the silence he'd been swimming in all day. The library was his sanctuary, but it was also a constant reminder of what he couldn't afford. The shelves were half empty, the computers were relics from a decade ago, and the new arrivals cart held books, donated by patrons, books with cracked spines and coffee-stained pages still. He loved it here. Loved the hushed reverence of the space, the way a story could transport you from a world of overdue bills and a sputtering car engine to somewhere magic. He was straightening a stack of returned novels when he saw a small leather wallet lying forgotten on the checkout counter. It wasn't flashy, but the leather was soft and dark, the kind that aged with grace, not wear. He picked it up. It felt heavy, expensive. He opened it cautiously, looking for an ID. A driver's license showed a name, Elara Vance, and an address in the city's gleaming downtown district. The kind of address that came with a doorman and a view that stretched for miles. But it wasn't the address that made his breath catch. Tucked into a hidden pocket behind the credit cards was a single folded photograph, yellowed and creased at the edges. It showed a young couple standing in front of a small white house with a crooked porch. Swing. The woman was laughing, her head thrown back, while the man looked at her with an expression of such unguarded love it made Liam's chest ache. Beside them stood a little girl no older than 4, with wide dark eyes and a serious expression that seemed too old for her. Small face beneath the photo was a small antique-looking key, brass and ornate, unlike any modern key he'd ever seen. Liam closed the wallet slowly. The weight of it had changed. It wasn't just leather and plastic anymore. It was a story, a history, a collection of irreplaceable things. He knew what it was like to lose a piece of your past. His wife's last letter was tucked in a shoebox under his bed, creased and fragile and more valuable than anything he owned. He could have just dropped the wallet in a mailbox, but looking at the photo, he knew he couldn't do that. This wasn't just a lost item, it was a lost connection, and the woman in that driver's license photo, with her polished smile and distant eyes, needed it back more than she probably knew. He tucked the wallet into his coat pocket just as the bell above the library door chimed, and Maya burst in her face, flushed from the cold, her backpack bouncing behind her. A gust of wind followed her, in rustling the pages of a newspaper on a nearby table, and for a moment the quiet library felt alive again. He straightened his worn flannel shirt, his heart settling into a plopslate and a versen steadier rhythm at the sight of his daughter. Her presence was an anchor in the shifting tides of his life, a constant source of light in a world that often felt dim and uncertain. Maya ran to him, her small arms wrapping around his waist in a tight hug that smelled faintly of crayons and playground dust. "Did you miss me, Daddy?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. He smiled, stroking her hair. Every minute, she pulled back her eyes, bright with the uncontainable energy of a 7-year-old. "Mrs. Davis said my drawing of the dragon looked like a sad lizard, but I told her it was a thoughtful dragon." He chuckled. Of course it was thoughtful. Dragons have a lot on their minds. He took her hand, his rough calloused fingers wrapping around her small soft ones. The contrast was a familiar comfort, a tangible reminder of his two worlds. The one where he fixed leaky pipes and patched worn-out books, and the one where he was simply Maya's. Dad, the weight of the wallet in his pocket felt heavier. Now he looked down at his daughter's trusting face, at the worn knees of her jeans and the scuffed toes of her sneakers, and the familiar ache of inadequacy tightened in his chest. He was doing his best. But his best never seemed to be enough. The rent was due next week, the car was making a noise he couldn't afford to fix, and their grocery list was a careful calculation of needs over wants, and yet here he was holding a wallet that likely contained more money than he made in a month. A wallet that belonged to a woman from a world so different from his, it might as well be another planet. He could have taken the cash. No one would have known he could have used. Put it to catch up on bills, to buy Maya a new coat, one that didn't have a patch on the elbow, to finally fix the leak in their apartment ceiling. But the thought dissolved as quickly as it formed, because he remembered the look on the captioned man's face in the photograph, that unguarded love, that fierce protection, and he knew he couldn't betray that, not for any amount of money. "Come on, kiddo," he said, squeezing her hand. "Let's go home, I've got something important to do." As they stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the library door closing behind them, with a soft click, Liam felt a quiet resolve settle over him. He didn't know who Alara Vance was, but he knew that the contents of her wallet were priceless. He was. "I'm going to return it, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because in a world that often took too much, he understood the profound importance of giving something back, especially a piece of someone's history." The Vance Tower was a shard of glass and steel piercing the downtown skyline, a monument to a world Liam only ever saw from a distance. Its lobby was a cavern of polished marble and hushed efficiency, where people in tailored suits moved with a purpose that felt both foreign and intimidating. A large, abstract sculpture stood in the center, its metallic curves reflecting the cool, recessed lighting like a silent sentinel. Liam stood just inside the revolving doors. For a moment, Maya's hand gripping his tightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. He felt a familiar knot of inadequacy tighten in his stomach. He was wearing his cleanest work shirt, but it was still just a flannel. His jeans were patched, his boots scuffed. He felt like a ghost from another era, haunting a place he didn't belong. A security guard with a clipboard and an earpiece approached them. His expression impassive. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but firm, a carefully constructed wall of professionalism. Liam cleared his throat. "I'm here to see Alara Vance. I need to return something of hers." The guard's eyes flicked over Liam's attire, a subtle but unmistakable assessment. "Miss Vance doesn't take unscheduled appointments. You can leave a message with the concierge." Hem held up the wallet. "It's personal. I need to give it to her directly." The guard's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid that's not possible, sir. If you leave the item with me, I'll insure it." "Gets to her." Liam's jaw tightened. He hadn't come all this way to hand over a piece of someone's past to a stranger in a suit. He thought of the photograph, the key, the irreplaceable artifacts of a life he didn't know. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'll wait." He led Maya over to a leather bench in the corner of the lobby, a piece of furniture that probably cost more than his car, and sat down. The guard watched them for a moment, then spoke into his wrist, and walked away. Maya leaned against him, her head resting on his arm. "Is that lady a queen, Daddy?" she whispered. Hem smiled faintly. "Something like that." They sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, watching the silent dance of wealth and power unfold around them. People glided past their faces, illuminated by the glow of their phones. Their conversations were a low murmur of stock prices and acquisitions, a language Liam didn't speak after 20 minutes. A woman in a sharp pantsuit and heels that clicked with authority approached them. Her smile was tight, professional, and didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Hale, I'm Audra, Miss Vance's assistant. I understand you have something for her." Liam stood up. I do, and I'd like to give it to her myself. Audra's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Miss Vance is in a meeting. She's asked me to retrieve it for her. I'm sure she has, Hem said evenly. But this is something she'll want to receive in person. I'll wait for her meeting to end. He didn't know where the stubbornness came from. Maybe it was the memory of his own lost treasures. Maybe it was the way these people looked through him like he was invisible, but he wasn't leaving until he knew. The wallet was safe. Audra's polite facade began to crack. Sir, this is highly irregular. So is finding a wallet with a piece of someone's history inside, he replied. Holding her gaze, the lobby felt colder now, the hushed efficiency replaced by a quiet tension. Maya squeezed his hand, her small gesture, a silent vote of confidence. He wasn't just a librarian in a worn shirt. He was her father, and he wasn't backing down. Audra stared at him for a long moment, her mind clearly calculating the potential for a scene. Then she sighed, a barely audible sound of defeat. Wait here, she said, before turning on her heel and clicking back towards the elevators. Liam let out a slow breath. He didn't know. He'd been holding Maya. Looked up at him, her eyes full of trust. You were very brave, Daddy, he smiled down at her. Had a good co-pilot. He knew this wasn't his world. He knew he was breaking rules. He didn't understand, but as he looked at the photograph in his mind's eye, he knew he was doing the right thing for the woman who had lost it, even if she didn't know it yet. Elara Vance sat at the head of a glass conference table, the city spread out beneath her like a map of her own. Making the room was silent, except for the low hum of the ventilation system and the rustle of papers. As her board members pretended to review documents they'd already memorized, she was in the middle of negotiating a multi-million-dollar merger, a deal that would solidify her company's dominance for the next decade. But her mind wasn't on the numbers, it was on the empty space in her purse, the missing weight of her wallet. She'd noticed it was gone an hour ago, a quiet panic tightening in her chest. It wasn't the credit card, she could cancel those in seconds. It wasn't the cash, it was the photo, the key, the only tangible links to a past her parents had scrubbed from their history, a past she was desperately trying to piece together. Her parents had never spoken of their life before the money, before the Vance name became a brand. They had no old photo albums, no stories of their childhood. It was as if their lives began the day her father sold his first patent, and she was raised in that sterile present, a world of tutors, nannies, and a silence that was heavier than any conversation. The photo was the only clue she'd found, it tucked away in an old book in her father's study a few years ago, a single image of a life she'd never known. The key had been with it. She didn't know what it unlocked, but she knew it was important. A part of her was convinced it was the key to understanding who she was beyond the name Vance. Her assistant Audra slipped into the room and leaned down to whisper in her ear, her voice a low, urgent hum. I'm sorry to interrupt, Miss Vance, but there's a man in the lobby. He found your wallet. He refuses to give it to anyone but you. Ilara's head snapped up. A man. He has a child with him. He says it's personal. The board members shifted their eyes, darting between Ilara and Audra, sensing a disruption in the carefully orchestrated performance. Ilara stood up abruptly, the sound of her chair sliding back echoing in the silent room. Excuse me, gentlemen, she said, her voice calm but her mind racing. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. She walked out of the conference room, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't care about the board, or the merger, or the optics of it all. She just cared about the wallet. The man waiting in the prior lobby was not what she expected. He stood tall, his shoulders back, his expression a mixture of patience and quiet defiance. A little girl with wide, curious eyes stood beside him, holding his hand like an anchor. He was dressed in a worn flannel shirt and jeans. His hands were calloused, the kind of hands that fixed things, that built things. He looked completely out of place in her world, of glass and steel, and yet he stood his ground with a dignity that a room full of suits couldn't muster. "Mr. Hale," Elara said, her voice softer than she intended. "I'm Elara Vance." He met her eyes, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I believe this is yours," he said, holding out the wallet. She took it, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. The touch was electric, a jolt of something real in a world that was anything, but she opened it, her hands trembling slightly. The photo was there, the key was there, everything was there, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled. Her knees washed over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "I can't tell you what this means to me." "I think I have an idea," he said, gesturing to the photo. "Some things can't be replaced." She looked at him, then really looked at him. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the quiet strength in his posture. He hadn't just returned her wallet. He'd returned a piece of her soul, and he had asked for nothing in return. "I'd like to offer you a reward," she said, her voice regaining some of its usual composure. He shook his head. "Not necessary. I'm just glad it's back in the right hands." He turned to his daughter. "Come on, Maya, let's go." As they walked away, Elara stood there, the wallet clutched in her hand, watching them go. The man who had nothing had given her everything, and the billionaire who had everything suddenly felt like she had nothing at all. She looked at the photo of the laughing couple and then at the back of the man in the flannel shirt. And for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost. Hope. The library was quiet. The next morning, the air still and cool. Liam moved through the stacks with a familiar sense of peace. The encounter at the Vance Tower already felt like a dream, a strange, surreal interlude in his otherwise predictable life. He had returned the wallet, and that was the end of it. Or so, he thought. Around noon, a delivery truck pulled up outside the library. A sleek, modern vehicle with no logos, no branding. Just a quiet hum of efficiency. Two men in crisp uniforms began unloading boxes, not just a few, but dozens of them. They stacked them neatly on the curb, their movements precise, and silent. Liam watched from the window, a frown creasing his brow. He hadn't ordered any books. The library's budget was frozen and had been for years. He walked outside as the men finished unloading the last box. "Excuse me," he said. "I think there's been a mistake. These aren't for us." One of the men checked a tablet. "Oak Creek Public Library," he confirmed. "Anonymous donation." He handed him a digital clipboard to sign, and then they were gone, leaving him standing on the sidewalk surrounded by a mountain of cardboard. Liam opened one of the boxes. Cautiously inside were brand new hardcovers, books with crisp, uncreased spines. Kind he only ever saw in bookstore windows. They were children's classics, fantasy novels, science, encyclopedias, everything his young patrons had been asking for years. He opened another box, and then another. Each one was filled with treasures. It was a treasure trove, a miracle, an impossible gift. His heart pounded in his chest. This was more than the library's annual budget combined. It was a lifeline, a chance to breathe life back into a place that was slowly fading. He knew who it was. From there was no note, no card. But he knew it was her Elara Vance, a quiet thank you, delivered in a way that spoke louder than words. It wasn't a reward, not directly. It was something else, something more thoughtful, more personal. She hadn't just given him money, she had given his world something it desperately needed. He spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking the boxes, his hands moving with a renewed sense of purpose. He stacked the books on empty shelves, filling the gaps that had been there for too long. The library began to feel different, fuller, brighter, more alive. When Maya arrived after school, her eyes widened at the sight of the new editions. "Daddy!" she gasped, running her hands over the glossy covers. "Where did all these books come from?" "A friend," Ham said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite place. A very kind friend. That evening after the library had closed, Hem sat at his desk, staring at the newly filled shelves. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He felt a strange mix of gratitude and uneasy. Lara Vance had reached into his world from her glass tower and changed it with a quiet wave of her hand. She had done a good thing, an incredible thing, but it also highlighted the chasm between them. She could solve his biggest problem with an anonymous phone call while he was still counting coins for gas money. The coins-pressed gesture was kind, but it was also a reminder of the power she wielded. A power he couldn't comprehend. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of an unspoken debt. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted a reward. But she had given him one. Anyway, a gift that was both a blessing and a burden, a quiet testament to the worlds that separated them, and the one small moment that had connected them. Lara stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her office, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. She held the old photograph in her hands, her thumb gently stroking the faded image of the smiling woman who was her mother. The woman she barely remembered. The library donation had been an impulse, a way to repay Liam's kindness without making it feel like a transaction. She had imagined him opening the boxes, his surprise, his gratitude. But now, a hollow feeling echoed in her chest. It felt too easy, too distant, too much. Like the way her father had always solved problems with a checkbook, she wanted to do more. She wanted to understand the man who had looked at the photo in her wallet and seen not just a picture, but a history. She wanted to know the world where people returned lost things not for a reward, but because it was the right thing to do the next day. She did something she hadn't done in years. She cleared her schedule. She told Audra to cancel her meetings and hold all her calls. Then, she drove her sleek black car out of the city, leaving the glass towers and the relentless hum of commerce behind her. She drove until the skyscrapers melted into suburbs, and the suburbs faded into the quiet, tree-lined streets of Oak Creek. She found the library easily, a small brick building nestled between a bakery and an old hardware store. It looked like a place that had been loved for a long time, its edges softened by years of use. She parked across the street, and just watched. For a while she saw children run up the steps, their backpacks bouncing. She saw an elderly man leave with a stack of books under his arm. She saw Liam step outside to sweep the front steps, his movements steady and unhurried. He looked like he belonged there, like he was a part of the building's very foundation. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, and got out of the car. She walked across the street, her heels clicking on the pavement, a sound that felt too loud in the quiet afternoon air. The bell above the library door chimed as she stepped inside. The scent of old books and warm dust enveloped her, a smell she hadn't realized she missed. Liam looked up from behind the counter, his eyes widening in surprise. When he saw her, Miss Vance, he said, his voice a low rumble of astonishment. "What are you doing here?" She smiled, a small, nervous smile that felt more real than any she had given in a boardroom. "I was in the neighborhood," she said the lie, feeling flimsy and transparent in the face of his steady gaze, "and I was hoping you could recommend a good book." He stared at her. For a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. "I think I can help with that," he said, gesturing to the newly filled shelves. "We just got a few new arrivals." The air in the library was thick with unspoken words, a quiet hum of curiosity and caution. Liam led Lara through the aisles, his hands brushing against the spines of books as he talked. His voice was a low, steady murmur, a soothing counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of her life. She found herself listening not just to his words, but to the cadence of his voice, the way it softened when he talked about a favorite author, the way it filled the quiet space between them with a sense of calm. He recommended a novel, a sprawling historical epic about a family torn apart by war and secrets. It's about finding your way back to who you are, he said, handing her the book. Even when you think you've lost the map. She took it, her fingers brushing his again, the brief touch sending a shiver of warmth through her. She clutched the book to her chest like a shield. It sounds perfect, she said, her voice barely. A whisper, Maya, came running in from the children's section, a stack of picture books in her arms. She stopped short when she saw Ilara, her eyes widening in recognition. "It's you," she said, "the wallet lady." Ilara knelt down to her level, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "It's me, and my name is Ilara." Maya tilted her head. "Ilara," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "That's a pretty name, like a star." Ilara felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't been called pretty in years. She'd been called powerful, sharp, ruthless, but never pretty. Not in that simple, innocent way. "Thank you, Maya," she said, her voice thick, with an emotion she couldn't hide. Liam watched them from a distance. A quiet observer of this strange, beautiful collision of worlds, he saw the way Ilara's polished exterior softened in Maya's presence, the way her eyes lost their guarded edge and filled with a light he hadn't seen before. He saw a woman who was tired of being a brand, a woman who was searching for something real in a world of artifice, and he felt a dangerous pull towards her, a connection that went beyond gratitude or curiosity. It was a recognition of a shared loneliness, a silent understanding of what it meant to be adrift in a world that didn't always make sense. As Ilara left the library that day, the book clutched in her hand, and Maya's words echoing in her ears, she knew this wasn't the end of her journey to Oak Creek. It was just the beginning. She had come looking for a book, but she had found something more, something she hadn't even known. She was searching for a glimmer of human connection, a spark of warmth in the cold, empty landscape of her life, and she knew she had to come back. Ilara returned to the library the following week, and the week after that, her visits became a quiet ritual, a sacred pause in the relentless forward march of her life. She, too, would arrive. In the late afternoon, her expensive car. A stark contrast to the worn pavement of Oak Creek's main street, and slip into the hushed sanctuary of the library. She always brought the book. Liam had recommended with her, its pages now softened and worn at the edges, a testament to the hours she had spent lost in its world. They would talk for hours, their conversations weaving through the aisles like a secret thread. He would tell her stories about the library's patrons. The quirky old man who only read westerns, the young mother who checked out the same parenting book every month, the teenager who hid in the poetry section to escape the noise of his own life. She would listen, her chin resting on her hand, her prate, eyes fixed on his face, a quiet hunger in her gaze. She learned about his life in small, fragmented pieces. He told her about his wife, a high school sweetheart with a wild laugh, and a love for gardening, who had been taken from them too soon by an illness that had come on fast and fierce. He spoke of her not with bitterness, but with a soft-edged grief that had become a part of him, a quiet ache that he carried with a gentle strength. Ilara found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else. She told him about her childhood, a lonely landscape of empty rooms and absent parents, of a silence that was so loud it had taught her to build walls around her heart. She didn't tell him about the money or the company or the crushing weight of the Vance name. She just told him about the loneliness, and he listened without judgment, without pity, just a quiet understanding that mirrored her own Maya, became the bridge between their two worlds. She would greet Ilara with a fierce hug, her small body a bundle of warmth and unabashed affection. She would show Ilara her latest drawings, her wobbly handwriting, her favorite picture books. She would sit between them as they talked, a silent but powerful presence, a reminder of the innocence and joy that still existed in the world one afternoon, As they sat in the quiet corner of the children's section, Maya looked up at Alara with her wide, serious eyes. "Are you going to be our friend now?" she asked, her voice full of a child's simple logic. Alara looked at him, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else. Something she couldn't quite decipher. She then turned back to Maya and smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes and crinkled the corners. "I'd like that very much, Maya," she said. Her voice soft and sure as she spoke. The words, she realized how true they were. She didn't just want to be their friend. She needed to be their friend. She needed the quiet strength of Liam's presence, the unvarnished joy of Maya's laughter. She needed the sanctuary of this small brick library, a place where she could finally be herself, stripped of the titles and expectations that had defined her for so long, a place where she could just be Alara, a woman, searching for a story of her own. The autumn air grew crisper, the leaves turning from green to a fiery palette of crimson and gold. Alara's visits to the library became a fixed point in her week, a quiet anchor in the turbulent sea of her life. She found herself looking forward to the drive out of the city, the way the landscape softened, and the air cleared, the way the world slowed down to a more human pace. She started to help Liam around the library, shelving books, organizing the donation pile, even learning the Dewey Decimal System, a task she found surprisingly satisfying. Her hands, once accustomed to the smooth glass of a smartphone screen and the cold metal of a boardroom table, grew familiar with the rough texture of old book covers, the soft dust that coated the shelves. She wore jeans and comfortable sweaters, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her expensive heels replaced by practical flats. She was slowly shedding the skin of Alara Vance, CEO, and rediscovering the woman she had been before the world had told her who to be. Hum watched her transformation with a quiet sense of wonder. He saw the way the tension in her shoulders eased, the way her laughter became more frequent and less guarded, the way she looked at Maya with a tenderness that was both beautiful, heartbreaking to witness. He knew he was falling for her. It was a slow, quiet fall, a gradual descent into a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in years. He was drawn to her vulnerability, her intelligence, her quiet strength. He saw past the designer clothes and the expensive car to the lonely woman who was searching for a place to belong, a place where she could be seen for who she was, not what she represented. One rainy afternoon, as they worked together in the back room, sorting through a new batch of donated books, the power flickered and went out, plunging the library into a semi-darkness illuminated only by the gray light from the windows. "Well," Liam said with a sigh, "looks like the old generator finally gave up the ghost." Alara stood in the quiet darkness, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always been afraid of the dark, a childish fear that had lingered into adulthood, a fear of the unknown, of the things that lurked in the shadows. But here, in the quiet sanctuary of the library, with him by her side, she felt a strange sense of calm. "It's okay," she said, her voice a soft whisper in the stillness. "The dark isn't so scary when you're not alone." Him turned to her, his face barely visible in the dim light. He could see the soft outline of her features, the glint of her eyes. He took a step closer, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Her fingers were cold, but they wrapped around his with a surprising strength. They stood there for a long moment, their hands clasped together in the quiet darkness, the sound of the rain tapping against the windows, a gentle rhythm that matched the beating of their hearts. In that moment, there were no secrets, no walls, no hidden identities, just two people finding solace in each other's presence, two souls who had been adrift in their own separate darkness. Finally finding a flicker of light in each other, the power came back on as suddenly as it had gone out, flooding the room with a bright fluorescent light that felt harsh and intrusive after the gentle intimacy of the darkness. Liam and Alara pulled their hands apart, the sudden movement feeling awkward and self-conscious. The spell was broken the moment had passed, but the echo of it lingered in the air between them, a silent testament to the connection that was growing stronger. With each passing day, they finished sorting the books in a comfortable silence. The easy camaraderie they had built over the past few weeks, returning to fill the space that had been momentarily charged with something more, something deeper when they were done. Liam walked Ilara to her car. The rain had softened to a light drizzle, the air smelling of wet earth and fallen leaves. "Thank you for your help today," he said, his voice a low murmur against the soft patter of the rain. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Ilara smiled her eyes, meeting his in the dim light of the street lamp. "I think you would have been just fine," she said. "You're stronger than you think you are, Liam." He looked down at his hands, his calloused fingers, a testament to a life of hard work and quiet struggle. He had never thought of himself as strong. He was just a man doing his best to keep his head above water, to provide for his daughter, to honor the memory of the woman he had loved. But as he looked at Ilara, he saw a reflection of a strength he hadn't recognized in himself. He saw a man who had faced loss and hardship with a quiet dignity, a man who had created a loving home for his daughter in the face of adversity, a man who had opened his heart to a stranger and shown her a kindness she had never known. "Maybe you're right," he said, his voice thick with an emotion. "He couldn't hide. Maybe we're both stronger than we think." Ilara reached out her hand, her fingers gently brushing against his cheek. The touch was light, fleeting, but it sent a jolt of warmth through him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the woman standing in front of him. "I'll see you next week," she said, her voice a soft promise in the rainy night. He watched her drive away, her car's red taillights disappearing into the darkness. He stood there for a long time, the rain soaking through his jacket. But he didn't feel the cold. He felt a flicker of hope, a dangerous, beautiful feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. He was falling in love with Ilara Vance, and he was terrified and exhilarated all at once. He knew that their worlds were miles apart, that their lives were built on different foundations, but in the quiet moments they shared in the sanctuary of the library, he felt a connection that transcended their differences, a bond that was forged in the shared language of loneliness and hope. The local newspaper, the Oak Creek Chronicle, was a small, weekly publication that focused more on town bake sales and high school football scores than on hard-hitting journalism. So, when a young ambitious reporter named Ben Carter got a tip about a mysterious benefactor funding the town's struggling library, he saw it as his chance to write a story with a little more bite. He started hanging around the library, his notebook and pen always at the ready. He interviewed patrons. He talked to Liam, who was polite but guarded. He observed Ilara on her weekly visits, noticing her expensive car, her designer handbag, the subtle but unmistakable air of wealth that clung to her like a second skin. He did some digging, a little online research, a few phone calls to contacts in the city, and it didn't take him long to uncover the truth. Ilara Vance, the reclusive heiress to the Vance conglomerate, a woman who had vanished from the public eye months ago, was spending her days shelving books in a small-town library. It was the kind of story that wrote itself a modern-day fairy tale with a mysterious princess and a humble librarian. The article was published on a sunny Tuesday morning. The headline splashed across the front page in bold black letters. "Billionaire heiress finds refuge in Oak Creek Library, mystery benefactor revealed." The story was accompanied by a grainy photo of Ilara and Liam, standing outside the library, their heads close together as they talked, their expressions unguarded and intimate. The article was a sensation. It was picked up by a city news blog, then a national wire service within hours. Ilara Vance was trending on social media. The quiet sanctuary of Oak Creek was suddenly thrust into the harsh glare of the national spotlight. Reporters and photographers descended on the town, their cars lining the streets, their cameras pointed at the small brick library. Like weapons, Liam arrived at the library that morning to find a circus camped out on his front steps. Microphones were thrust in his face, questions were shouted at him from all directions. "What's your relationship with Miss Vance? Are you a couple? Did you know who she was?" He pushed his way through the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest, his face a mask of anger and confusion. He unlocked the library door and slammed it shut behind him. The sound echoing in the empty room, he stood in the silence, his hands clenched into fists. The peace of his world had been shattered, the quiet haven he had built for himself. And Maya had been invaded, and it was all because of her. He felt a surge of betrayal, a cold, bitter anger that washed over him in a sickening wave. She had lied to him, not with her words, but with her silence. She had let him believe she was just a woman, searching for a good book, when in reality she was an heiress, playing a part in a story. He didn't understand. The bell above the door chimed, and Maya came running in her face, a mixture of fear and excitement. "Daddy, there are so many people outside with cameras. Are we?" Famous Liam knelt down and pulled her into a tight hug, his anger dissolving into a deep, aching sadness. "No, baby," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "We're not famous, we're just a story." He held her close, his heart breaking for the innocence that had just been stolen from her. The quiet life he had fought so hard to protect had been ripped apart, and he didn't know how to put it back together again. He knew he had to talk to Alara, he had to understand why she had deceived him, why she had brought this chaos into their lives. But as he looked at the fear in his daughter's eyes, he knew that their quiet, fragile connection had been irrevocably broken. The glass tower that had once felt like a fortress now felt like a cage. Ilara paced the length of her penthouse apartment, the city lights a cold, indifferent backdrop to the storm raging inside her. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke. Audra was fielding calls from every major news outlet. Her board members were demanding a statement her father had left. A series of clipped voicemails, his voice a mixture of anger and concern. But Alara didn't answer any of them. She just stared at the grainy photo. On her tablet, the image of her and Hyam standing outside the library, their faces a study in unguarded intimacy. The world saw a billionaire heiress and a small-town librarian, a story of class and intrigue, a modern-day fairy tale. But they didn't see the truth. They didn't see the quiet moments shared over dusty books, the shared laughter in the children's section, the silent understanding that had passed between them in the dark. They didn't see the way he had looked at her with a kindness that had chipped away at the walls around her heart. They didn't see the woman who had finally started to feel like she belonged somewhere, and now it was all gone, shattered by the harsh glare of a headline. She knew she had to go to him. She had to explain, to apologize, to try and fix the mess she had created. She grabbed her car keys, her hands trembling so hard she could barely fit the key in the ignition. She drove out of the city like a woman possessed, the speedometer creeping higher and higher as she fled the concrete jungle that had become her prison. When she arrived in Oak Creek, the town was unrecognizable. The quiet streets were clogged with news vans, satellite trucks, and a throng of curious onlookers. The library was surrounded, a fortress under siege. She parked her car a block away and made her way through the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. She pulled her coat tighter around her, her face shielded by a scarf, but it was no use. People recognized her. Cameras flashed, whispers followed her like a shadow. She finally reached the library door, her hand shaking as she reached for the handle. It was locked. She knocked once, then twice, her knuckles rapping against the solid wood with a desperate urgency. The door opened a crack and Liam's face appeared in the narrow opening. His expression was a mask of cold fury. His eyes, which had once looked at her with such warmth, were now filled with a pain and betrayal that cut her to the core. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Liam, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this." "You never wanted this," he said with a bitter laugh. "Did you think you could just waltz into my life, play the part of a normal person, and not expect any consequences?" "I wasn't playing a part," she pleaded. "The person you met in this library, that was the real me. The real you," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "The real you is a billionaire heiress, who lies to people, who uses them as a temporary escape from her own gilded cage." "That's not true," she cried, her tears finally falling. "I never lied to you. You lied with every book you shelved, with every story you read to my daughter, with every moment you let me believe. You were just someone who needed a friend." He opened the door wider, and, for a moment, she thought he was going to let her in, but then he stepped aside and gestured to the chaos outside. "Look at what you've done," he said, his voice a low growl. "You've turned my life into a spectacle. You've turned my Dolostee daughter into a headline. You've destroyed the only peace we've ever known." He took a step back, his hand on the door. "I want you to leave," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "And I don't want you to come back." He closed the door in her face. The sound of the lock clicking into place, echoing in the silence of her shattered heart. She stood there for a long moment, the tears streaming down her face, the flashes of the cameras, a blinding blur. She had come to Oak Creek to find herself, but in the process, she had lost. The only person who had ever truly seen her, the days that followed, were a blur of gray, colorless and empty. Liam went through the motions of his life with a mechanical precision that belied the hollow ache in his chest. He opened the library each morning, his face a stoic mask. For the few brave patrons who crossed the picket line of reporters, he read to Maya each night, his voice a monotone drone that lacked its usual warmth and expression. He was a ghost in his own life, haunting the spaces that had once brought him joy. The media frenzy eventually subsided, the reporters moving on to the next scandal, the next headline. But the damage was done. The quiet trust that had defined his relationship with the town had been eroded, replaced by a cautious distance, a subtle but palpable shift in the way people looked at him. They saw him now, not as Liam the librarian, but as Liam the man who had been involved with the billionaire heiress. He was a character in a story that wasn't his own, a footnote in the glamorous life of Ilara Vance. Maya felt the shift too. She grew quieter, more withdrawn, her bright, ebullient spirit dimmed by the confusion and fear that had invaded their lives. She stopped asking about Ilara, her name becoming a heavy, unspoken word that hung in the air between them, a painful reminder of what they had lost. Liam's heart ached for his daughter. He had tried to protect her, to shield her from the harsh realities of the world, but he had failed. He had let a stranger into their lives, a woman who had promised a glimmer of hope but had delivered a storm of chaos. And he blamed himself. He should have known better. He should have been more careful. He should have guarded his heart and his daughter's with a fiercer vigilance. One evening, as he was tucking Maya into bed, she looked up at him with her wide, serious eyes. "Daddy," she said, her voice a small whisper, "is Ilara ever coming back?" Liam's throat tightened. He sat down on the edge of her bed, his hand stroking her hair. "I don't think so, sweetheart," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't hide. Maya's eyes filled with tears. "But I miss her," she said, her voice breaking. "She was my friend." He pulled her into a tight hug, his own tears threatening to fall. "I know, baby," he said, his voice choked with grief. "I miss her too." In that moment he realized the depth of his own loss. He had pushed Ilara away out of anger and fear and pride, but he hadn't stopped loving her. He had just buried the feeling under a mountain of resentment and regret. He had closed the door on the one person who had made him feel alive again. And now the silence she had left behind was a deafening roar, a constant reminder of the beautiful, fragile thing he had destroyed. Elara retreated into the sterile silence of her glass tower, a prisoner in her own gilded cage. She threw herself into her work, with a frantic energy that bordered on obsession. She attended board meetings. She negotiated deals. She made decisions that would shape the future of the Vance conglomerate. But it was all just a distraction, a way to numb the hollow ache in her heart. She had lost Liam, she had lost Maya, she had lost the one place where she had felt truly seen, truly alive, the library, the scent of old books, the quiet murmur of Liam's voice, the warmth of Maya's hand in hers. It all felt like a dream, a beautiful fleeting memory that she couldn't hold on to. She had tried to apologize, to explain, to make him understand, but he had shut her out, his anger, a wall she couldn't penetrate. She couldn't blame him. She had brought chaos into his life. She had shattered the peace he had so carefully constructed for himself and his daughter. She was a force of destruction, a hurricane in a world that was not built to withstand her strength. One rainy afternoon, as she sat in her office staring out at the gray cityscape, she received an email from an unknown address. The subject line read simply, "A story for you." She opened it cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a short, animated video, the kind a child would make with a simple software program. The animation was crude, the characters stick figures, but the story was unmistakable. It showed a sad librarian and his daughter living in a gray, colorless world. Then a woman with a bright yellow aura appeared. She brought books and laughter and color into their lives. The stick figures smiled, they held hands, they built a beautiful garden together. Then a storm came, dark and angry, and the woman disappeared, leaving the librarian and his daughter alone in the gray world. Once more, the video ended with a single sentence written in a child's wobbly handwriting. "The garden is still here, but the flowers are sad." Elara watched the video over and over again, her tears blurring the screen. It was from Maya, a message in a bottle sent across the vast ocean that separated them, a plea for her to return, a reminder that the love they had shared had left a lasting mark. It was a small thing, a child's simple story, but it was enough. It was a spark of hope in the darkness, a flicker of light that ignited a fire within her. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't fix what she had broken, she couldn't erase the pain she had caused, but she could try to make things right. She could fight for the love she had found in that small brick library. She could fight for the family she had lost. And this time she wouldn't let fear or pride or the weight of her own world stand in her way. Elara Vance was done running. She was ready to fight. The first step was to take control of her own narrative. She called a press conference a move that sent shockwaves through the financial world. She stood before a room full of reporters, her posture poised and confident, her voice clear and steady. She didn't make excuses or apologies. She simply told the truth. She spoke of her loneliness, her search for authenticity, her desire to escape the gilded cage that had become her life. She spoke of the small-town library, the kind librarian, and his daughter who had shown her a world she had never known, a world of quiet strength and unconditional love. "I made a mistake," she said, her eyes meeting the camera with an unflinching honesty. "I hid my identity because I was afraid of being judged, of being seen as a headline instead of a person, but in doing so, I hurt the two people who mattered most to me. I betrayed their trust and I shattered their peace, and for that I am truly sorry." She then announced that she was stepping down as CEO of the Vance conglomerate, a decision that sent gasps rippling through the room. "I am taking an indefinite leave of absence to focus on what truly matters," she said. "I am going to fight for the family I found, and I am going to dedicate my resources to helping communities like Oak Creek, the Bayou, places that are the true heart of this country." She ended the press conference without taking any questions, leaving the room in a stunned silence. She had just dismantled her own empire, thrown away a life of power and privilege for their own pious land. chance to reclaim a love she had lost. Some called her a fool, others a hero. But Alara didn't care. She wasn't doing this for them, she was doing this for herself, for Liam, for Maya. She was finally choosing love over fear, authenticity, over artifice. She was choosing to be the woman Liam had seen in her, the woman who was stronger than she thought she was. Her next stop was Oak Creek. She drove not in her sleek black sedan, but in a rented minivan, a practical, unassuming vehicle that blended in with the quiet streets of the town. She didn't go to the library. Not yet. She went to the town hall where she met with the mayor and the town council. She presented them with a proposal, a plan to revitalize Oak Creek, to fund the library, to repair the community center, to create scholarships for the local high school students. She didn't ask for anything in return, no naming rights, no plaques, no public recognition. She just wanted to help, to give back to the community that had unknowingly given her so much. The news of her donation spread through the town like wildfire. The whispers of suspicion and resentment replaced by a sense of awe and gratitude. People started to see her not as the billionaire heiress who had brought chaos into their lives, but as a woman who was genuinely trying to make a difference. A woman who was using her power for good, not for personal gain. But Alara knew that her journey wasn't over. She still had to face the man. She had hurt the man she loved. She had to earn his forgiveness, his trust, his love, and she knew it wouldn't be easy. She had to prove to him that she wasn't just a fleeting storm, but a permanent part of his world. A woman who was ready to build a future with him. Brick by brick, story by story. Liam watched the press conference on the small television, in the library's break room, his heart a tangled mess of emotions. He saw the woman he had fallen in love with standing before the world, her vulnerability, a shield of strength, her honesty, a powerful weapon. He saw her dismantle her own life, her own empire, for the chance to reclaim what they had lost. He was stunned, humbled, and overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took his breath away. He had pushed her away out of fear and pride, but she had fought back with a courage he had never known. He had accused her of being a coward, but she was the bravest person he had ever met. He walked out of the break room, his mind reeling, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw Maya sitting at her usual table in the children's section, a book open in front of her, but her eyes were fixed on to the door, as if she was waiting for someone. He walked over and sat down beside her, his hand finding hers on the table. "She's coming back, isn't she, Daddy?" Maya asked, her voice a soft whisper. Liam smiled, his eyes filling with tears. "Yeah, baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I think she is." And then the bell above the library door chimed, and she was there. Alara stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of hope and fear, her eyes searching for his. She was no longer the polished heiress from the press conference. She was just Alara, the woman he loved, the woman who had stolen his heart with a shared book and a quiet smile. Liam stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked towards her, his steps slow and deliberate. He didn't say a word. He just opened his arms and she ran into them, her body collapsing against his in a wave of relief and love. They held each other for a long moment, their tears mingling together, a silent testament to the pain and the joy, the loss and the reunion. Maya came running over, her small arms wrapping around their legs. A perfect circle of family, a perfect circle of love. "I knew you'd come back," she said, her voice muffled against Alara's coat. Alara knelt down and pulled her into the hug, her heart overflowing with a love so pure and powerful, it healed all the broken pieces within her. "I'll never leave again," she whispered, her promise, a sacred vow. In the quiet sanctuary of the library, the world outside could rage with its storms and its headlines, but in this small brick building, surrounded by the stories of generations past, they had found their own happily ever after, a story of love, forgiveness, And the quiet magic of a second chance, the library in Oak Creek, became more than just a place for books. It became a symbol of their new life together, a testament to the love that had been forged in its quiet aisles. Ilara's foundation poured resources into the small town, revitalizing not just the library but the entire community. The old community center was renovated into a state-of-the-art facility with after-school programs for kids and vocational training for adults. The local park was given a makeover with a new playground and a community garden where people could grow their own food. Oak Creek blossomed under her quiet, careful guidance, a town reborn from the ashes of neglect. Ilara herself blossomed too. She found a sense of purpose and fulfillment she had never known in her life of corporate boardrooms and financial acquisitions. She worked alongside Liam in the library, her days filled with the simple joy of shelving books, reading to children, and connecting with the people of the town. She was no longer Ilara Vance, the reclusive heiress. She was just Ilara, a beloved member of the community, a woman who was known for her kindness, her generosity, and her infectious laugh. Liam watched her with a love and admiration that grew with each passing day. He saw her shed the last vestiges of her old life, the guardedness, the caution, the fear, and embrace the messy, beautiful reality of their life. Together, he had once been afraid of her world, of its power, its influence, its ability to destroy. But he now saw that she had used that power not for personal gain, but for the betterment of others. She had turned her privilege into a force for good, a legacy of compassion and community. One sunny afternoon, as they sat on the newly installed porch swing outside the library, watching Maya play in the new playground across the street, Liam turned to Ilara and took her hand. "Love you," he said, his voice quiet, but full of a conviction that was as solid as the foundation of the library itself. Ilara smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you too," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "You and Maya, you're my home. You're my story." He leaned in and kissed her. A slow, gentle kiss that was full of the promise of a future filled with love, laughter, and the quiet magic of ordinary days. They had come from different worlds, two lonely souls adrift in their own separate storms, but they had found each other in the quiet sanctuary of a small-town library, and together they had built a life that was more beautiful and more meaningful than either of them could have ever imagined. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. It was messy. It was hard-won. And it was a testament to the transformative power of love. A love that could bridge any divide, heal any wound, and turn the most unlikely of beginnings into a happily ever after that was written in the prime stars and lived out in the quiet everyday moments of a life shared, a life cherished, a life that was finally truly their own. And they lived it one page, one chapter, one beautiful, messy day at a time, surrounded by the love of a community they had helped to heal, and the quiet magic of the stories that had brought them together in the first place, a story that was just beginning and would continue to unfold for many years to come, a legacy of love that would be whispered in the prospered aisles of the Oak Creek Library. For generations to come, a reminder that the greatest treasures are not found in wallets or bank accounts, but in the quiet, priceless moments of human connection, a story that proved that even the most broken of hearts can find a way to heal, a way to love, a way to build a happily ever after that is more beautiful than any fairy tale could ever imagine, because it is real, because it is true, because it is theirs.